You planning to buy something or just killing time? I'm comparing models. I'm looking at the student discount options too.
If you're not buying today, you need to move along.
You know that feeling when you walk into a store? Just to look around? Maybe you're comparing prices. Maybe you're killing time. Maybe you're actually planning to buy something, but you want to make sure you're making the right choice. That's all 17-year-old Jordan Williams was doing on a Tuesday afternoon in April. He had no idea that the next 15 minutes would change his life forever. Before we dive in, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button right now. Picture this: a shopping mall outside Boston, spring break. Families walking around with shopping bags, teenagers laughing in groups. The smell of pretzels from the food court mixing with that new phone smell from the electronic stores. Jordan walked into the Tech Hub store around 2 in the afternoon. He wasn't carrying a backpack. He was dressed like any other kid his age. Jeans, a hoodie, sneakers that had seen better days. Nothing flashy, nothing suspicious, just normal. He'd been researching laptops online for weeks. College applications were coming up, and he needed something reliable. Something that could handle video editing for his film projects. Something that wouldn't die in the middle of an essay at 3 in the morning. This wasn't some random impulse trip. Jordan knew what he wanted. He'd watched YouTube reviews. He'd compared specs on Reddit threads. He'd even made a spreadsheet, yes, a spreadsheet, ranking his top 3 choices by price, performance, and battery life. He was a kid who did his homework, so when he walked into that store, he went straight to the laptop section. He picked up a silver model from the display, tested the trackpad, opened the browser to check the specs one more time, pulled out his phone to compare prices with what he'd seen online. Just shopping. Around him, the store buzzed with life. A mom and her 2 kids were looking at tablets. A guy in a business suit was tapping away on a demo phone. A group of 3 girls were taking selfies with the new camera display. Everyone was doing the same thing Jordan was doing. Browsing, touching, comparing, taking their time. But here's the thing about Jordan that you need to understand. His last name was Williams. His father's name was Robert Williams. And Robert Williams was the CEO of a Fortune 500 tech company worth billions of dollars. The family lived in New York. They had resources most people can only dream about, but Jordan was also black. And in America, that changes things. Jordan had grown up knowing how people looked at him. He'd seen it in grocery stores when he was 12. He'd felt it in clothing shops when he was 15. That subtle shift in energy when he walked in. The way employees' eyes would track him just a little too closely. The way security guards would suddenly materialize in whatever aisle he was browsing. His parents had given him the talk. Not just about police, but about retail spaces too. Keep your hands visible. Don't put anything in your pockets. Be polite. Be calm. Don't give them a reason. But that day, Jordan thought he was just buying a laptop. He had no idea this ordinary spring break shopping trip would end up in federal court. The security guard's name was printed on his badge, but honestly, it doesn't matter. What matters is what he represented, what he did, and what happened next. He was a contract employee. He didn't work directly for Tech Hub. He worked for a third-party security company hired by the mall. His job was simple on paper: monitor the stores, watch for theft, respond to disturbances. But here's where it gets complicated. Because his job also required judgment, it required fairness, it required the ability to separate actual threats from personal bias. And on that Tuesday afternoon, he failed spectacularly. Jordan had been in the store for less than 5 minutes when the guard noticed him. The guard positioned himself near the entrance, arms crossed, watching. Just watching. Jordan picked up a laptop, tested the keyboard. The keys made that satisfying click sound. He checked the price tag, $1,299. He moved to the next model and did the same thing. Normal shopping behavior. But the guard kept watching. 2 minutes passed. Jordan pulled out his phone and started comparing the specs he was seeing with the reviews he'd saved. He wasn't hiding anything. He wasn't acting suspicious. He was just being thorough the way his dad had taught him to be. Do your research. Know what you're buying. Don't let anyone pressure you into something you don't need. But the guard had already made up his mind. He approached Jordan with that particular walk. You know the one. That authoritative stride that's meant to intimidate. And he asked in a tone that wasn't quite rude, but definitely wasn't friendly. You planning to buy something or just killing time? Jordan looked up, surprised. He stayed polite. He'd been trained for this. I'm comparing models, he said. I'm looking at the student discount options too. Can you tell me if you're not buying today, you need to move along? Jordan blinked. He looked around the store. At the mom with her kids, still browsing tablets after 20 minutes. At the businessman, still playing with phones. At the girls, now filming a TikTok video. They're just looking too, Jordan said, trying to keep his voice steady. The guard's expression hardened. They're different. Let's go. Different. That word hung in the air like smoke. Jordan felt it in his chest, that familiar tightness, that mixture of anger and fear and disbelief that he'd felt so many times before. He wasn't imagining it. He wasn't being sensitive. The guard had just revealed exactly what this was about. This wasn't about loitering. This wasn't about store policy. This was about the color of his skin. I have a right to be here, Jordan said. His voice a little louder now, not yelling, just firm. I'm a customer. Store policy says I can ask anyone to leave if they're not making a purchase. You're loitering. I've been here for 5 minutes. And I'm asking you to leave. Jordan felt his heart pounding. Every instinct told him to fight this, to stand his ground, to demand justice right there in the moment. But another part of him, the part that had been trained by too many conversations with his parents, knew how this could go wrong. I want to speak to a manager, Jordan said. The guard blocked his path to the employee station. I don't need to get anyone. Store policy? Let's go. Jordan raised his voice just slightly. This is discrimination. And that's when the guard reached for his radio. Yeah, I need backup at Tech Hub. Got a loiterer refusing to leave. A Tech Hub employee in a blue shirt noticed the commotion. She started walking over, concern on her face. The guard waved her off. It's handled. He's leaving now. But Jordan wasn't leaving. The guard didn't wait for a response. He reached out and gripped Jordan's upper arm, not violently but firmly, like Jordan was a problem to be removed. Don't touch me, Jordan said, pulling his arm away. He didn't resist physically, he didn't push or shove, but he made it clear he wasn't going quietly. By now, other customers had noticed. A few people pulled out their phones. The employee in the blue shirt stood frozen near the display table, clearly unsure whether to intervene. The guard kept his hand on Jordan's shoulder and kept walking him toward the exit. Mall security arrived within 2 minutes. 2 officers flanked Jordan near the entrance, and one of them asked for his ID. Jordan handed it over, his hands shaking slightly. They ran his name through their system. No warrants, no priors, nothing. Jordan Williams was clean as a whistle. One of the officers asked what happened. The guard explained that Jordan was loitering and refused to leave when asked. He didn't mention the other customers. He didn't mention Jordan's polite request to speak with a manager. He didn't mention the word different. He framed the situation as a simple case of non-compliance. Jordan tried to explain his side. I was shopping, he said. He targeted me without cause. There are other customers doing the exact same thing I was doing. The officers listened. They nodded. But they didn't push back on the guard's version. They asked Jordan if he wanted to leave voluntarily or if they needed to cite him for trespassing. Jordan felt the trap closing around him. He could keep arguing and risk getting cited, maybe even arrested. Or he could leave and deal with it later. But before he made his choice, he asked if he could call his father. The officers allowed it. Jordan pulled out his phone with trembling fingers and FaceTimed Robert Williams. His father answered immediately, still in his office in Manhattan. Jordan could see the New York skyline behind him. "Dad," Jordan's voice cracked. "I need help." He explained what was happening. Robert stayed calm. He'd been trained as a lawyer before moving into corporate leadership. He knew exactly how to handle situations like this. "Let me speak to the security guard," Robert said. The guard declined. "This doesn't involve you. Your son's trespassing." "What did he do wrong?" The guard gave a vague answer about loitering and store policy. Robert didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. His tone was ice cold and precise. "I'm going to need badge numbers, your employer's name, and the store manager's contact information." The guard's expression shifted. Just slightly, like he was starting to realize this might not be a regular day. "He can leave or we cite him. Your choice." Jordan left. He met his aunt in the parking lot, his eyes burning with unshed tears. Not from fear, from rage, from humiliation. Robert booked a flight from New York that evening. He wasn't coming to yell, he wasn't coming to threaten, he was coming to document everything, and he was coming to make sure this never happened again. Robert Williams arrived in Boston the next morning. He didn't go back to the store where Jordan was kicked out. That would have been emotional. Reactive. Robert Williams didn't do reactive. He went to a different tech hub location and requested a meeting with the manager. He was calm, professional, wearing a suit that probably cost more than the security guard's monthly salary. But he was also relentless. Robert asked to review the footage from the previous day. He filed a formal discrimination complaint with Tech Hub corporate headquarters. The store manager was apologetic, explaining that the security guard was a third-party contractor, not a Tech Hub employee. Robert already knew that. He'd spent the previous evening researching. He'd read the mall's security contract. He'd looked up the company's history. He'd found 3 similar complaints from other locations. He came prepared. Robert provided a detailed timeline. He gave names. He asked how many other customers were stopped that day during the same 2-hour window when Jordan was there. The manager checked the records. No one else had been asked to leave. Not a single person. Robert thanked her for the information, his expression unreadable. Then he left. Within 24 hours, Tech Hub Corporate escalated his complaint to the regional vice president. The guard was placed on administrative leave pending review, but Robert wasn't waiting for Tech Hub's internal process to play out. He hired a civil rights attorney that same week. The attorney filed a public records request for the body cam footage. The mall security officers had been wearing cameras the entire time. The request was approved, and when that footage came back, it showed everything. It showed Jordan browsing calmly. It showed white customers doing the exact same thing without being approached. It showed the guard grabbing Jordan's arm. It showed the mall security officers treating Jordan like a suspect instead of a customer. The security company launched its own internal investigation, but by that point the damage was done. The footage was public. The story was spreading, and Robert Williams had the resources to make sure it didn't disappear. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most families don't have those resources. Most families can't afford a civil rights attorney. Most families can't take time off work to fly across the country and demand accountability. Most families don't have connections to corporate leadership or experience with legal systems. Robert knew that, and he knew that if he had the power to fight back, he had a responsibility to do it. 1 week after the incident, Robert's attorney issued a public statement. Local news picked up the story immediately. The headline read, "Teen kicked out of tech store. Father is Fortune 500 CEO." The story framed the incident as racial profiling. It included the stark contrast between Jordan's treatment and Robert's corporate status. And that contrast was exactly the point, because it highlighted a simple question. What if Jordan's father hadn't been a CEO? What if the family couldn't afford a lawyer? What if no one had the resources to fight back? Would anything have changed? Community members started sharing their own stories. People posted on social media about similar experiences at the same mall. One woman said security followed her teenage son through 3 different stores. Another man said he was stopped and questioned while shopping for his daughter's birthday. The pattern became impossible to ignore. TechHub released a statement. "We are committed to ensuring all customers feel welcome in our stores. We take these allegations seriously and are working with our partners to address this matter." The statement was careful, corporate. It didn't admit fault. It didn't name the guard or the security company. It promised action without committing to specifics. The security company issued no public comment. They cited the ongoing investigation, but behind the scenes things were moving fast. The guard's employment was terminated. The exact timeline wasn't disclosed publicly, but sources confirmed he was no longer working for the company within 2 weeks. The local NAACP chapter requested a meeting with mall management. They wanted to discuss security practices and training protocols. The meeting happened. Mall management agreed to implement mandatory retraining for all security staff. They also agreed to review their contract with the security company. It was progress. Small progress. But progress nonetheless. Jordan gave a brief interview to the local news. He was calm, measured. He focused on principle, not his family's wealth. "This shouldn't have happened to me," he said, looking directly into the camera. "It shouldn't happen to anyone, but I know a lot of people don't have the ability to fight back the way my family can. That's why we're doing this." He wasn't trying to be a martyr. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He was trying to change a system. The story went national. The combination of racial profiling and corporate power made it irresistible to media outlets. People debated it online. Some sided with Jordan and his family, calling it a clear case of discrimination. Others questioned what came next. The lawsuit. Robert Williams and his legal team filed a $12.9 million federal lawsuit, citing racial profiling, violation of civil rights, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. $12.9 million. People asked, was that really necessary? But the debate missed the point entirely. The lawsuit wasn't just about compensation. It was about accountability. It was about sending a message that this behavior has consequences. Legal experts noted that the amount was designed to make companies think twice before contracting security firms with poor training standards. TechHub wasn't named as a defendant, but they were subpoenaed for internal communications. The legal team wanted to know what TechHub knew about the security company's practices. They wanted to know if there had been prior complaints. They wanted to establish whether this was an isolated incident or part of a pattern. The defendants were the security company, the mall management, and the individual guard. The body cam footage became Exhibit A. Store surveillance became Exhibit B. Witness statements filled out the rest. The security company's attorney argued that the guard followed standard protocol. He said the guard made a judgment call based on behavior, not race. But the footage contradicted that defense completely. It showed Jordan behaving exactly like other customers who weren't approached. It showed the moment the guard decided Jordan didn't belong. It showed bias in action. The case was assigned to a federal judge with a history of ruling on discrimination cases. Legal analysts predicted the case could take months or even years to resolve, but the public attention meant that a settlement was likely. Companies don't like prolonged legal battles that keep their name in headlines. And while the legal system ground forward slowly, because that's how these things work, the real impact was already happening. TechHub updated its vendor contracts to include explicit anti-discrimination clauses. Any company providing security services had to demonstrate that their staff received implicit bias training. They had to show documented protocols for handling customer interactions, and they had to agree to independent audits if complaints arose. The security company faced scrutiny from other clients. Malls and retail centers started asking questions. How many complaints had there been? What did their training program look like? Were there other incidents that hadn't been reported? The company's reputation took a serious hit. Some clients chose not to renew their contracts. Mall management announced a new policy. All security incidents involving customer removal had to be documented with written justification within 24 hours. Footage had to be preserved. Managers had to review the reports monthly and flag any patterns. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was a step toward accountability. The guard himself disappeared from public view. His name was in the court filings, but media outlets chose not to highlight it. The focus remained on the system, not the individual. That was intentional. Robert Williams and his legal team wanted to change policy, not destroy one person's life. Settlement talks were rumored but not confirmed. Legal experts suggested the case would likely settle out of court. The amount would probably be lower than $12.9 million, but it would include policy commitments and public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. That's how these cases usually end. Jordan enrolled in college that fall. He chose not to discuss the case publicly while it was ongoing, but he did speak at a few community events about his experience. He became a youth advocate for retail equity. He talked about the small ways bias shows up in everyday interactions. He encouraged other young people to document incidents and speak up when they saw injustice. Robert Williams made a public statement that if the case resulted in a settlement, a portion of the funds would be donated to civil rights organizations. The money was never the point, he said. The point was change. Several months after the incident, Jordan gave one extended interview. He talked about what it felt like to be profiled in a store. The worst part wasn't being asked to leave, he said quietly. The worst part was realizing that the guards saw me as a threat before I even opened my mouth. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just shopping. But in his mind, I didn't belong there. He paused, looking down at his hands. And that's the part that stays with you. You start wondering if people are always looking at you that way. You start second-guessing whether you're welcome in spaces that should be open to everyone. Jordan also talked about privilege. He acknowledged that his family had resources most people don't have. That made me more determined to use those resources for something bigger than myself, he said. My dad could have just let it go. We could have moved on. But he knew that if we didn't fight back, the next kid wouldn't have anyone fighting for them. So we made a choice. We decided this wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who gets treated like they don't belong. The interviewer asked if he regretted going to the store that day. Jordan shook his head. No, if this hadn't happened to me, it would have happened to someone else. And maybe that person wouldn't have had the ability to do anything about it. So I'm glad it was me. I'm glad we could turn it into something that might actually change things. His words were measured. Calm. He didn't express anger or call for revenge. He expressed something more powerful than that. He expressed commitment, a determination to make sure the system worked better for the next person. That kind of response doesn't come from bitterness. It comes from clarity. Jordan knew exactly what happened to him. He knew why it happened, and he knew that the only way to stop it from happening again was to shine a light on it and demand accountability. This story isn't unique. Black shoppers report higher rates of surveillance in retail spaces across the country. Studies document it. Employees admit it. The data is overwhelming. But data alone doesn't change behavior. Accountability does. Security experts say implicit bias training is a start, but it's not enough. Training without consequences is just a box. Companies check to protect themselves from lawsuits. Real change requires documentation, oversight, penalties for misconduct. It requires systems that catch bad behavior before it escalates. The body cam footage in Jordan's case became a teaching tool. Civil rights organizations use it in workshops. They show it to security staff during training sessions. They break down the exact moment when the guard decided Jordan didn't belong. They ask trainees to identify the assumptions that led to that decision. It's uncomfortable to watch. That's exactly the point. Other families came forward with their own stories after Jordan's case went public. Some filed complaints, some didn't. But the conversation shifted. Malls and stores started paying attention. They realized that one viral incident could damage their brand for years. They realized that contracting cheap security wasn't worth the risk. TechHub's policy changes set a precedent. Other major retailers followed. They updated their contracts. They required bias training. They implemented oversight systems. These changes didn't happen overnight, but they happened. And they started because one family refused to let the incident disappear. Jordan's story also highlighted the gap between families who can fight back and families who can't. Robert Williams had money. He had lawyers. He had connections. He had time. Most people don't. That's why systemic change can't rely on individual lawsuits. It has to come from policy, regulation, and corporate accountability. The lawsuit is still pending as of now. Settlement talks continue behind closed doors. The outcome will matter. But in many ways, the real outcome already happened. The conversation changed, the policies changed, the training changed, and the next time a security guard looks at a black teenager in a store, maybe, just maybe, he'll think twice before making an assumption. One body cam video changed policy, but not overnight. Change takes pressure, it takes visibility, it takes people willing to fight even when it's uncomfortable. So let me ask you something. Should one person's bias be enough to kick a customer out of a store? Should companies be held responsible when their contractors discriminate? And what happens to all the people who don't have the resources to fight back? Because if we don't demand better training, better oversight, and real consequences for misconduct, then we're just waiting for the next security guard, the next teenager, and the next lawsuit. Jordan Williams was 17 years old when he walked into that store. He was just trying to buy a laptop. He walked out with something much heavier. The knowledge that in America, even doing everything right doesn't always protect you. That the color of your skin can turn a simple shopping trip into a federal case. But he also walked away with something else. The knowledge that he could fight back, that his family could fight back, and that their fight might make it easier for the next person. That's not justice. Not yet. But it's a step toward it. And sometimes that's all we can ask for. One step, then another, until we've walked far enough that the world looks different than it did when we started. Jordan's still walking, so is his father. So are the lawyers, the advocates, the community members who shared their stories. They're all still walking toward a future where a black teenager can browse laptops without being seen as a threat. We're not there yet. But we're closer than we were before Jordan walked into that store on a Tuesday afternoon in April. And that has to count for something. That has to mean something. Because if it doesn't, then what are we even doing? The fight continues. The conversation continues. And we all have a choice about whether to look away or lean in. What's yours? Please hit subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for listening. Thanks for caring. And I'll see you in the next one.